A $500 software-defined radio can now do what used to require state-level capability. Security researchers showed that with that radio and a laptop, they can intercept unencrypted freight rail signals. They can even inject commands that trigger emergency braking or disable it entirely. And those commands can hit trains hauling $40 million of grain. The bigger problem is scale. The United States moves 80% of its agricultural trade by sea, 55 million tons of grain by rail, and 70 million tons by barge. Every link in that chain now runs through networked digital systems built for speed, not survival. In this episode, you will see how that design choice turns efficiency into strategic fragility. Start with ports. The Port of Los Angeles, the Western Hemisphere's busiest port, reports 40 million cyber attacks every month, including ransomware, malware, spear phishing, and credential harvesting. In August 2024, the Reseda ransomware group breached the Port of Seattle. Baggage handling, cargo tracking, and terminal coordination were disrupted for weeks. Across agriculture, the trend is getting worse, not better. The Food and Agriculture ISAC logged 6,377 ransomware incidents in 2025, an 82% year-over-year surge. Researchers linked activity to groups such as Keelin, Akira, and CL0P, exploiting IT service and file transfer weaknesses. This is not random noise, it is organized pressure. And the target surface is enormous. Agriculture represents 5.6% of U.S. GDP and 10.4% of domestic employment. The system spans more than 220,000 registered food manufacturing, processing, and storage facilities. A threat that wide is hard to defend and easy to probe. Now zoom into ocean freight. Roughly 80% of agricultural commodities crossing an international border move by sea. That makes ports the most concentrated single failure point in the food chain. If ports stall, farm output can exist on paper, but fail in reality. Modern terminals look physical, but they run on software. Automated guided vehicles, robotic gantry cranes, and cloud-based terminal operating systems choreograph every move. If the terminal operating system is compromised, gates freeze and machines stop mid-yard. Cargo manifests can vanish or lock behind encryption, while perishable goods sit inaccessible. That alone would be serious, but governance gaps make it worse. Historical assessments found major U.S. ports that had never conducted a formal cybersecurity vulnerability assessment. Some also had no functional incident response plan on file. In plain terms, certain critical nodes had no tested playbook for the day they got hit. Next, rail. Rail moves 66% of all feed grain entering the southeastern United States. In Georgia, dependence rises to 91%. The attack surface spans signaling arrays, automated switching networks, positive train control, and centralized dispatch telemetry. The weak point is not only mechanical, it is digital. In July 2025, CISA warned that radio links between end-of-train and head-of-train devices have no encryption and no authentication. That means systems accepting commands cannot always verify who sent them. For critical braking telemetry, that is a dangerous design gap. Researchers then demonstrated exploitability in practical terms. Commercial software-defined radios costing under $500 intercepted that telemetry and injected fraudulent commands. Those commands could force sudden, unauthorized stoppages or mechanical brake failures from considerable distance. This is not a lab fantasy. It is a field-relevant vulnerability. The warning was not new. Independent analysts flagged this issue as early as 2005. The Association of American Railroads spent 20 years downplaying the threat. Secure replacement systems remain years away and are not expected before 2027 at the earliest. That timeline is the core risk window. Now switch to the most flexible layer, trucking. Trucking operations rely on digital dispatch, electronic logging devices, and GPS routing. Precision farming equipment also depends heavily on GPS timing and positioning. Mobility and field operations now share the same cyber exposure. A key technical detail is GPS L1, which many agricultural systems rely on. GPS L1 lacks modern encryption and has no anti-jamming protection. That leaves it vulnerable to spoofing and interference. If signals are degraded, routing collapses, perishable deliveries stall, the cold chain fractures, and autonomous equipment goes blind. To see where this goes, look at recent history. In August 2012, Iranian operators deployed Shamoon wiper malware against Saudi Aramco. Roughly 30,000 corporate workstations were erased. The company had to revert to paper-based manual operations just to keep oil flowing. 5 years later, Russian military intelligence launched NotPetya through Ukrainian tax software. The malware escaped its intended border and embedded into Maersk's global network. About 4,000 servers and 45,000 PCs went down nearly at once. One software event became a logistics shock. The blast radius was global. APM terminals saw operations freeze at 76 port terminals worldwide. Maersk's direct financial damage alone was estimated between $200 million and $300 million. U.S. firms tracked by supply chain researchers also reported severe downstream and upstream disruption. By 2021, agriculture itself became a primary target. Rival operators hit JBS, forced plant shutdowns across multiple countries, and extracted an $11 million ransom payment. That was a warning that food infrastructure was now squarely in ransomware economics. The signal was clear. Attackers believed disruption would monetize. During that same fall harvest season, 6 U.S. grain cooperatives were hit in rapid succession. New Cooperative in Iowa handled 40% of the state's soybean throughput and 20% of its corn. A single local attack therefore carried state-level throughput consequences. Scale made one node systemically important. New Cooperative received a $6 million ransom demand and went offline. Way tickets reverted to handwriting, and communications fell back to fax. A separate black matter attack on the same cooperative demanded $5.9 million. Harvest season does not pause while networks recover. Simulation work shows the hidden cost of timing. If a cyber attack disrupts a fertilizer applicator during optimal crop stages, losses reach $13,000 to $32,000 per 100 acres from missed windows alone. Those are not abstract estimates in a low-margin sector. They are margin-destroying shocks concentrated into a few days. Then came the geopolitical shock that compressed everything. On February 28, 2026, Operation Epic Fury, a joint U.S.-Israeli strike campaign, produced massive structural damage across Iran, hit military and nuclear assets, and killed Ayatollah Ali Khamenei. That changed the cyber and logistics threat environment overnight. What had been risk modeling became real-time contingency. Iran's response hit maritime logistics fast. The IRGC executed a de facto closure of the Strait of Hormuz, and daily vessel transits fell from 153 to 13. Roughly 30% of the world's ammonia-based nitrogen fertilizer transits that corridor. The timing landed directly before Northern Hemisphere spring planting, the worst possible point on biologically fixed calendars. Prices reacted immediately. Urea at the New Orleans import hub jumped 32% in 1 week, rising from $516 to $683 per metric ton. The United States imports nearly half of its domestic urea supply, so global disruption transmits quickly into local input costs. Producers then face tighter margins before seed even goes in. Market analysts projected second-order effects right away. Global wheat prices were expected to climb 4.2%. Developing nations were expected to absorb double-digit inflationary shocks in staple foods. The same event pressures farm economics and household food access simultaneously. The cyber track escalated in parallel. Israel reportedly launched what analysts called the largest cyber attack in history against Iran, reducing national internet connectivity to about 4% of normal capacity. Iranian state-aligned operators then targeted Israeli ports, energy companies, and government apps. For U.S. agriculture, the key pattern is spillover into North American critical infrastructure. Now let's connect cyber disruption to Farmgate money. The mechanism is basis, the spread between local cash price and exchange futures price. When logistics fail, grain gets trapped inland and buyers widen basis aggressively. Farmers then get paid less, even if futures look steady on a screen. Storage constraints amplify that basis shock. Capacity expansion stalled after 2020, even as yields kept rising. After a strong harvest, on-farm storage utilization reaches about 80%, leaving total U.S. capacity only 5% above total production. That is not much cushion when transportation seizes. We saw this dynamic in the 2013 to 2014 Upper Midwest rail crisis. Local soybean and wheat basis widened by an average of 30 cents per bushel. In the worst-hit locations, basis fell to negative 50 cents. Transportation stress translated directly into local price pain. For a regional cooperative moving 5 million bushels of corn, arithmetic gets brutal fast. A 30-cent basis drop removes $1.5 million in local farm value almost overnight. That loss does not require crop failure or drought. It only requires grain with nowhere to go. Then, demurrage costs start stacking. Union Pacific charges $240 per day on rail cars held beyond free time. BNSF starts at $75 per day after 24 hours. These are clock-based penalties that keep running while systems are down. At BNSF, charges escalate to $150 per day after 48 hours. If a cyber attack paralyzes an export terminal and a shuttle is canceled, the fee is $400 per car. The schedule penalty can become larger than expected in a single decision cycle. When time uncertainty rises, cost certainty disappears. Now, apply those rules to scale. A canceled 110-car unit train creates an immediate $44,000 bill. Bulk vessels waiting on a compromised terminal operating system burn $16,400 to $17,400 per day in demurrage. Under disruption, delay itself becomes a commodity with a rising price. Stretch that delay to a structural blockade and totals explode. Over 2 weeks, with 30 vessels idle, direct demurrage reaches about $7.14 million. That number excludes broader market and inventory effects. It is just the visible meter running at the port. Perishables are hit even harder. Vegetables, fruits, and nuts lose 2.93% of cargo value for every day of delay. General food products lose 1.63% per day. Spoilage economics move faster than legal or technical recovery timelines. Losses also compound non-linearly. Under exponential loss modeling, by day 6, cumulative destruction reaches 2.3 times the first day's loss. Weighting is not neutral. Each extra day has a steeper marginal cost. Consumers then meet the same shock through pricing behavior. Economists call it rockets and feathers. Retail prices shoot up quickly when supply chains break, then drift down slowly after systems normalize. Firms use the high price window to rebuild margins squeezed during disruption. Data supports that pattern. A 1 standard deviation shock in the Global Supply Chain Pressure Index maps to a 1.5 percentage point increase in goods inflation. During 2021 and 2022, supply-side pressures and international bottlenecks explained roughly 60% of the U.S. inflation surge. Cyber-induced logistics stress can therefore feed directly into CPI dynamics. Now, zoom out to export competition. International corn trade behaves like a zero-sum game when shocks hit. When Russia invaded Ukraine in 2022, shipping costs from Odessa jumped from $31 to $97 per metric ton. The United States did not capture that displaced demand because its own port and rail systems were already capacity constrained. Competitors moved faster. Brazil expanded into Chinese corn and soybean demand after China relaxed phytosanitary restrictions on Brazilian imports. Trade flows followed reliability, not historical loyalty. Once buyers adapt, reversal is hard. By 2023, Brazil had surpassed the United States as the world's largest corn exporter. It captured nearly 30% of global market share. That shift shows how quickly a logistics opening becomes a geopolitical realignment. Lost share can outlast the original disruption. Econometric evidence quantifies the slope of that loss. A 1% increase in systemic logistical disruption corresponds to a 0.5 to 0.7% long-term decline in agricultural exports. From 2018 to 2019 retaliatory tariff conflicts, Annualized U.S. agricultural losses were estimated at $13.5 to $18.7 billion. Cumulative direct export losses exceeded $27 billion. Livestock operations face the shortest biological fuse. Commercial poultry feed inventories are measured in days, not weeks. In late 2022, severe Union Pacific failures pushed Foster Farms, the largest poultry producer in the western United States, towards starving millions of birds. The Federal Surface Transportation Board had to intervene on an emergency basis. In a cyber-induced rail shutdown, substitute trucking demand spikes exponentially. Diesel and spot freight rates rise to punitive levels. Producers then face a no-win choice: pay extreme trucking costs or cull flocks early. Either option destroys equity and pushes delayed meat inflation to consumers. The public safety net is also under strain. Federal projections show $44.3 billion in direct government payments to agriculture in 2026, up from $30.5 billion the year before. At the same time, farm sector debt is climbing toward $386.4 billion. Support is rising, while balance sheets remain fragile. The One Big Beautiful Bill Act increased statutory reference prices by 10 to 21%. Soybeans moved from $8.40 to $10, and peanuts from $535 to $630 per ton. On paper, those levels look protective. In practice, funding durability matters as much as statutory numbers. The financing coalition has weakened. Policymakers cut $186 billion from SNAP over a decade and rescinded $1.8 billion from clean energy and conservation programs. That fracture weakened the urban-rural alliance that had supported farm policy since the 1970s. Subsidies now stand more politically exposed. A procedural shift added another risk. In August 2025, the administration used a pocket rescission to cancel $5 billion in foreign aid by timing the request past a 45-day congressional review window and into the fiscal deadline. That tactic created a precedent for fast funding reversals. Agricultural research, rural broadband, and conservation lines sit directly in that pathway. Some segments are even more exposed because baseline protections are thin. Specialty crops generate over $75 billion in annual cash receipts, yet they largely lack statutory reference prices and robust crop insurance coverage. Shocks there hit quickly and recover slowly. Distribution of relief has reflected that imbalance. Of the $12 billion Farmer Bridge Assistance Program, only $1 billion reached specialty crop producers. In 2025, the sector absorbed $3.6 billion in almond losses, $1.4 billion in apple losses, and $763 million in lettuce losses. Those numbers map to real, regional income shocks. Long-run resilience also depends on research capacity. Inflation-adjusted federal funding for public agricultural R&D has fallen by roughly 1/3 since its 2002 peak. China has already surpassed the United States in total agricultural research volume. That weakens future adaptation exactly when system stress is rising. Now combine these pressures into a sustained cyber scenario. In a multi-month disruption, basis could collapse by 60 to 80 cents per bushel across interior grain markets. That scale would separate cash bids from futures and erase billions in farm equity. Highly leveraged operations would face widespread insolvency. Contract law can magnify operational loss. Major exporters would likely invoke force majeure, while Brazil and Argentina could permanently absorb 10 to 15% of U.S. global market share. But New York courts interpret force majeure narrowly and usually require the specific triggering event to be explicitly listed. Generic telecom language may leave firms fully liable for cyber events counsel never anticipated. So what defenses exist now? CISA and the U.S. Coast Guard report recurring weaknesses, including poor ITOT network segmentation, credentials stored in plain text, shared local administrator rights, and minimal event logging. These are not exotic flaws. They are foundational controls that were skipped or deferred. Software exposure at ports is also concrete. The Navis N4 terminal operating system, used at major Pacific Northwest terminals, has two known severe vulnerabilities: One carries a severity score of 9.8 out of 10 and could allow unauthenticated remote takeover. That is a high-impact pathway into physical throughput. River infrastructure is moving in a riskier direction, too. The U.S. Army Corps of Engineers is transitioning locks and dams toward remote operations using networked programmable logic controllers. The International Federation of Professional and Technical Engineers warned Congress about the cybersecurity implications of that shift. Remote efficiency can widen remote attackability. A single-node failure could therefore scale nationally. Analysts warn that an attack on the Melvin Price Lock could stall Mississippi River barge traffic for weeks. That corridor moves about 70 million tons of export grain each year, or roughly 47% of total U.S. export volume. One compromised node can become a national bottleneck. The United States built the most efficient agricultural supply chain in the world. Every automation and integration that cut cost also expanded attack surface. Grain now moves through software as much as steel, water, and diesel. If the code stops, food does not merely slow down. It starts disappearing from the systems people depend on.